All right, it's 2:00. I am Christiane Warlick, and I am the secretary for the OU-Tulsa Social Work Student Association. This is a student event, so no CEUs are available except for our panelists. They can get CEUs. Thank you all for attending. And I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. If you guys would say your name, the year you graduated, the program you were in, if it was BSW or MSW, and then the agency where you work, and then briefly describe your current professional role. And let's start with Jay. Is it Bridwell?
It's Bridwell, yes. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Jay Bridwell. I graduated with MSW and MPA in 2018, obviously at the University of Oklahoma. Currently, I work at an agency called the Homeless Alliance, where I am the Director of Support Services, overseeing 21 staff in 5 different programs, looking to reduce the homeless population in Oklahoma City.
All right, and then let's hear from Misty Stanberry.
Hi. So yes, I'm Misty Stanberry. I graduated with my BSW in 2015 and then my MSW in 2019 through OU. I currently work for OKDHS, and I have kind of a unique role there. I am the practicum supervisor through child welfare. So I work with all of the practicum students. They can be BSW level, CW PEP would be if they're the BSW level. And then for the MSW, it can be from all over, sometimes OU and then sometimes from other schools. In addition to that, I just work with like community partners in Cleveland County where I'm located at. Care Portal is one of the biggest partners that I work with. So I'm kind of a liaison between DHS and Care Portal that provides for the needs for the kiddos that are in DHS custody and families that we serve. So
that's great. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Oh, and then just so everyone knows, if you have a question and you put it in the chat, I will be keeping an eye on questions that pop up in the chat. Melanie Ferguson, are you with us?
I'm here. So I'm Melanie Ferguson. I'm actually not an OU grad. I'm a little bit of an outlier, but I have my MSSW from the University of Louisville in Kentucky from 2011. I am currently working as the senior therapist at Remerge in Oklahoma City. We are a prison diversion program for moms specifically. So I help supervise our therapeutic team. I have a small caseload of clients. I do a lot of group facilitation and coordination with other partners, and have worked in domestic violence work for quite a while before coming to Remerge last year.
All right, great, thank you. Let's see, it looks like I have a Daniel Howell on my list, but I don't think that they are with us. Okay, and then I have, it says Katie Southwest, but I see a Katie Southwick. Katie, are you on our panel? Okay, I guess not. So it looks like we have 3 people on our panel today. All right. Our first question is to describe the adjustment from student to your social work profession. And we'll start with Jay.
Well, I'm a bit of a kind of an odd duck. So I was already working in a professional level while I was going to school. I worked at North Care prior to the Homeless Alliance. And prior to that, I was 24 years as a mental health and substance abuse professional in the Air Force. So it's a little bit of a tricky situation, but so I will just answer it in this way. I think the adjustment really came down to a lot less have tos in terms of papers and writing and reading and groups and projects and all of that kind of stuff. So when I finished my master's and I was still working at Northcare, not a whole lot changed except for those major things. So it was a little more relaxing, and I could mostly focus on the day-to-day work that I was doing at Northcare.
Thank you. Misty, how about you?
So I guess initially when I graduated with my BSW, I was a CW PEP student. And so I already knew and had done my practicum for DHS. I think probably the thing that was even from that to even like gaining more information, insight in my MSW was applying theory to like real world practice. So it's like, when you're in school, you get lots of book insight and research behind the different theories, but then actually getting to, be in the field, create treatment plans with families, things like that you begin to realize that you understand theory a lot more than what you thought you did while you were in school. So that was relieving in a lot of ways.
That's a relief to hear, because I definitely wonder about that at times as a current student. Melanie, how about your transition from student to professional?
I would echo a lot of what Jay said, that in some ways life got a lot easier because I wasn't juggling practicum and school and work and all of those things. And, you didn't always have like a project pending hanging over your head. I could read for fun again instead of, only reading for class. I also had the situation where my first social work job ended up being somewhere I had done one of my practicum placements at. And so I wasn't as nervous going into that because I knew the team, I knew the agency. And so that helped to make it a pretty easy transition. So I feel like life actually settled down a little bit at that point.
That is also reassuring to hear. All right, our next question is, what has been most surprising or unexpected during your adjustment to your professional role? Let's start this time with Melanie. We're going to mix things up.
Most surprising. I think, so I've been, I guess 10 years now post-graduation. And what I do now is not necessary. I didn't set out, and I probably didn't know what a female diversion program was at that point, but sort of how every job and role I've had, for me, I've become a little more specialized and have really found what I love doing and what populations I really like working with. And that just sort of evolved out of every single thing that I did. When I first went to school, I thought I wanted to work with teenagers. That is not what I want to do at this point. I love adults. But it was kind of a process to get there. And I think in the beginning, sometimes it feels like I have to know exactly what I want to do and just pursue it. And it comes in time. And I think that was kind of a relief too.
Yeah, everything I'm hearing so far is just really reassuring. Misty, how about you? What has been the most surprising or unexpected?
I think for me, I was a non-traditional student. So I had a family, had been married for a long time. And so I had a daycare in my home for 8 years before I went back to school, and kind of really only went back to school because I thought I needed to. Like it was just, I need to probably get my degree and do something once my kids are out of the home. And so I think the thing that surprised me the most is I'm a pretty like set in my ways kind of person. I like routine and I'm comfortable in that. And I think it has surprised me how much I've loved the aspect, like DHS has so many different divisions and places where you can see so many different kinds of social work in action, whether you're working in, because I've done the permanency planning side, the CPS side. And I think I'm just surprised by how much I love it all and how much I've actually found out that I love change and that I get bored really easy. And so the change keeps me really engaged and excited about the work that I'm doing. So I think that's what I just didn't expect that. I thought like, nope, I'll get in one role and that's where I'll land for the next decade. And that just has not been the case. And I've loved every moment of that.
Thank you. Misty, I don't know what it is, but at least on my end, your volume is like perfect and then it goes real quiet for a little while.
Okay.
I don't know what that's about.
I'll
Thank you.
sit closer.
Thank you. And then Jay, I want you to answer that question. And then it looks like Katie Southwick has joined us. So Jay, answer that question about what has surprised you, and then we will talk with Katie.
Great. I think the surprising thing for me was the idea of doing generalized case management. And then when you suddenly have an MSW and you're almost, you're not licensed, but you're giving this more peek behind the window of what therapists do. So I think that was the most surprising or maybe unexpected feeling, if I could put it in that term. Like suddenly, oh, I've got, some other kinds of unique responsibilities as an MSW compared to what I was when I was just a student and getting my master's. So I think that was the surprising thing that I kind of just noticed about myself.
Thank you. Okay, Katie, why don't you introduce yourself really quickly? Give us the year that you graduated, the program that you graduated from, where you work now, and just briefly describe your role.
Sorry about that. My computer decided to update itself on all of its software right as this started. So my name is Katie Southwick. I graduated from the BSW program in May of 2020. So right when this pandemic was starting. And then I got my first job out in the field as a family intervention specialist at a nonprofit in Oklahoma City called Youth Villages. We are partnered with DHS. And so what we do is kind of tag team and go in for intensive in-home services. I have 5 families on my caseload at a time. And we go into each family 3 times a week, twice telehealth, once in person. They have individualized treatment plans that we update bi-weekly. And it's a very unique role because I'm a court advocate and a case manager and kind of using therapeutic approach the entire time. So that's just a little overview of what I do.
Thank you. And I know you just joined us, but do you have an answer for that last question about what has been the most surprising or unexpected thing during your adjustment to your professional role?
I knew I would play quite a few roles. I just didn't realize, like being a case manager, I knew I would have very specific roles with my families, but I just didn't realize how much you kind of have to have community, not organizations, but connections at all times. And what's been the most surprising part about it is how often that updates itself. Like you constantly have to be on top of things changing. We had somebody in the office who was kind of in charge of keeping a resources book, and it drove them crazy because they can't keep up with it. So that's just been what's interesting is like you call one place and they're no longer offering services. So just constantly updating your families and yourself on your practice.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. Our next question is, have your strategies for self-care, time management, and organization shifted from when you were a student? And if so, how have they changed in your new role? Let's start with Misty.
So I'll lean in. So hopefully I won't cut out.
Thank you.
So I would say like, now my role is supervising students. When I first graduated, I was working in the field. And so it was intense. So like, graduating and kind of all the responsibilities that I had on my plate with 3 kiddos, trying to manage all of that was like, it was unique in and of itself. But then working in the field, and just like the unpredictable hours and the realization of like, especially in the world of DHS, working with, say, like foster families, for instance, there were a lot of times where a foster parent might call you at night, and technically you're not scheduled to work, so you could totally ignore those phone calls, but chances are you would probably be moving that kiddo the next day, and which would disrupt their placement, which would cause more trauma. So like being as informed as I was, through the social work program, I knew about things. And so it made my practice more, I was very intentional about those pieces of it. And so trying to communicate those parts to my family, and because it was like, if I was doing classwork at the kitchen table, people didn't have to walk away. I didn't have to like go to a separate place in the home or anything like that. And with these situations, it's confidential. And so trying to communicate that to my family, like, hey, doors closed, can't come in. So all of that was very different and unique. And, I had to learn to carve out very specific time of like, okay, my phone goes in this place at this time and it doesn't come out until this time, and if there are foster families that I know they have kids in their home that pose very, significant concerns and struggles, they had my personal phone number, but I trusted those people. We had a good relationship that they weren't just going to use that and abuse it. They were only going to use it when it was necessary. So I think all of that just created a place where I had to be super intentional about carving out those spaces and making sure that I did not compromise my family to meet all the needs of the clients and the, people that I was serving through my job. So.
Thank you. Jay, what about you? Have your strategies for self-care, time management, organization, had they altered since you have started work and are no longer a student?
What are those things again?
Okay, so self-care, time management.
I'm being facetious. I'm sorry.
Oh.
We all talk about self-care and time management and all those things that we want to practice as a student, and we learn as a profession. I was being a little facetious. Yes. A lot of that is kind of what I was talking about before, that it hasn't really changed because you have to be very intentional when you're doing, at least for me, being in a professional life and a student at the same time. So you have to be very intentional about managing your schedule and actually intentionally scheduling self-care, building that into your week, putting things on your calendar that do not schedule during this time. And so I don't think that's really changed for me much. I had to learn that really early on, trying to juggle a family, my work, and my studies. So for me, I don't change much because I just blended right into what I was already doing. So I was very fortunate in that way.
Thank you. Katie, what about you?
Self-care has gotten very creative, especially going into the workforce for the first time that I did. I had been a student and working, like I had part-time jobs while I was a student, a full-time student. And so going from that to having like not being a student right now, because I decided to take the year off before going into school to really immerse myself in the professional world and see what it's like. I had to get very creative, and it's been different. I've had to start asking myself each day, what does my body need today? Is it more movement? Is it, some music? Is it going to be a hot shower? Or spending time with friends, and there's nothing that's set in place. So it's, again, it's really important to schedule it in, kind of like Jay was saying. because if you don't, it's really easy to just skip over it and be like, oh, there's actual other tasks. I think the biggest thing that my takeaway has been with self-care this year is, especially with the pandemic and so much telehealth happening, a big thing for me is having a separation from work and home. I'm just a very visual person, and so my environment is really important. I tried to go up to the office as much as I could, still following COVID guidelines. But it was really hard because I worked from home most of the time. And so getting out and about has been mainly my self-care, because unfortunately, work has become home for a lot of us. So I don't know, just getting out and about and doing what's right for you.
Thank you. Melanie, how about you?
I would say for me that it evolves during every season and every type of role that I've had. I've done home-based work, I've worked in a shelter, I've been a supervisor, I've been outpatient, so lots of settings. And I think it's really important to realize what works when you're in one role or when you're in the student role might have to really change. The seasons of the year, the seasons of life, like I think my biggest thing is just being really purposeful about revisiting what even is my self-care plan right now. What do I know works for me that I need to pick back up? What do I need to try that's different? Very much kind of a holistic approach about, it's not just pampering and massages, but it's going to therapy, it's going to the doctor, it's taking a mental health day, it's these things too. It's saying no, it's setting boundaries, it's changing jobs, like all of that is self-care also. And I think the other thing that's over the years gotten different is how I navigate sort of work-life boundaries. It's always I don't know I'll ever be where I want to be with that, but it's something that I'm always revisiting of how do I do this better and what do I need for myself and how much of my mental energy do I let work take up in my life.
Thank you. All right, guys, we've got about 2 more questions. And then remember, if you want me to ask a question for you, you can put it in the chat, or once I've worked through these next 2, I will open it up. And if you want to tackle it, you're welcome to ask your own question. Okay, what is a favorite way you have spent time when in the past you would have been studying or writing papers? Jay, how about you?
So I think for me, being in the Air Force, the opportunity to travel was pretty easy. Most of my time writing papers and reading and studying and things like that were mostly in the evenings or during the weekend. So having those weekends back to go and travel, go camping, seeing something new within the state, because you can get around the state pretty easily. And there's such a different variety around the whole state. So if you can allow yourself to kind of just get away from wherever you're at and just experience something new. And that's what was helpful for me and continues to be.
Very nice. Misty, what about you? How are you spending your free time these days?
I think like what Melanie said, I loved reading, and then I went back to school, and then all of a sudden I hated reading again. And so I've so enjoyed enjoying books again, remembering like books are often way better than the movies. And I just had gotten to a place where I was like, a book, I don't want to read another book. So that's nice. I really enjoy that. And then I'm always the kind of person like I said, I like my comfort zones. And so I always like to push against that. And so one thing I've done this year that's really unique is I took a position at Rose teaching child abuse and neglect, and then intro to sociology this semester. So that's been really, really fun. Like sometimes I feel a little bit out of my league and like, what in the world have I gotten myself into and what do I have to offer on this topic? But it's so much fun, and I love being on the other side of it and like the conversations that are happening. I can't wait to like try it actually in a classroom versus everything has been virtual, obviously, this semester. But that's just been a really fun thing I've gotten to do this year that I definitely would have never thought that I would have done.
That's great. What about you, Melanie?
Yeah, reading is still my biggest one. Being able to read for fun and not textbooks. I think also, like what Jay said, just, your schedule doesn't revolve around when things are due, or, practicum life and things like that. That's really nice. I mean, sleeping, like I was very bad at writing papers, the night before they were due, and pulling all-nighters and things that I'm way too old for at this point. But so having like healthy rhythms, cooking food at home. I mean, it's the simple things, but when you're all over the place and you're kind of just trying to make it through school, those things are hard. And I love being able to have routine and cook dinner if I want to. And just, I don't know, exercise, go for a run, do those kinds of things.
Thank you. All right, Katie, are you a reader too?
I am. I love to read, but this year I have taken a break from it just because of all my paperwork at work. It burns my eyeballs. So I'm done with it at the end of the day. But kind of what I've learned this year, like I've really, really enjoyed all of what would have been the time that would have been used for writing papers or reading for class has been replaced with drive time. So like not even talking about my time off, but during the job. But it's actually really good because I get some clear headspace. I've listened to 1,000,001 podcasts at this point. And it's also given me a lot of time back to be able to talk to family and friends just when I'm on the road. So I feel more connected to the people in my life again. And another thing that I've really loved is I'm practicing my Spanish again, which I love so, so much. And I think that's going to be an important asset to have as a social worker, to be able to be bilingual. So we'll see what happens, but that's what I'm enjoying right now.
Oh, wow, that's great. All right. I do see a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm going to ask the last one that I have planned, and then I will get to the chat questions. What advice would you give to a new graduate entering the professional social work arena? Misty, let's start with you.
So I work with practicum students, and this is one thing that I always talk to them about. All of those students that you guys have met through your program, I don't think you realize, like, because you're all going to all these different places, all these different community partnerships, different private agencies, state agencies. If there's a way before you guys finish to make sure that you have everyone's phone number, where everyone's going, that is huge. Because when I graduated with my BSW and then MSW, I don't know how many times I called an agency in the city and someone answered the phone and I'm like, oh my gosh, hi, this is Misty. Like, do you remember me? I remember you. And like, if we would have known that, I could have just called them directly, but I had to do a bunch of searching and, things like that. So I just think that network that you can build while you guys are in school is amazing. And it's just really helpful.
Thank you. All right, Melanie, what about you?
I would say a few things. So one is, it is not worth staying in a job where you're burning out. It just is not. Even if it means you have to disrupt your license process, you take a pay cut, but don't do soul crushing work. It's just not worth it. And what's soul crushing for me might be really different than for someone else, and vice versa. But social workers can be really bad sometimes about putting our heads down and trying to plow through it, and trust your instincts. If it's not working for you, it's okay to let go. Another thing, and I see at least one of my students is on the call right now that I've shared with them, and I share when I have students, is be really mindful about what you ask about when you're interviewing for jobs. Know what you're looking for and know how much weight you put on responses. And so the example I give is I was interviewing for a job once, and it was a panel of 3 people, and I asked them how they encouraged self-care amongst their staff. And I got sort of like blank stares, and they kind of stumbled over their answer. And I took the job, but that proved to be very telling. That played itself out as I worked there. So just sort of know it's okay to ask things like that. I did lots of interviewing in my last job, and I always appreciated people who were prepared and had put thought into it. And then the other thing I will say is that if you are going to get licensed, if you're pursuing your LCSW, that's a temporary thing. So finding the best possible supervisor you can, if that is within your control, is really important. You will only be under someone's supervision for a while. Even if, I chose people during my path that ended up costing me more money than like a different option I had, but because I felt I could learn the most from them. And that was so valuable. You can't really, put a number on what that's worth, but finding good supervision is really important.
Thank you. Katie, what about you?
I'll try to make mine concise. Kind of like what Misty said, never forget a name. Networking is so, so important. I have, even just in this first year, it's a smaller world than you think. You'll call in and somebody will know your name through someone else. And it also helps down the line when you're looking for other jobs or helping other friends look for jobs. Just knowing people is so important. Something that I had to get used to is just understanding that there is always going to be something to do on your to-do list. So don't feel bad about it. It's never ending, things are added. So my best advice for that is just to know within like what your hours are, know your most productive time for the paperwork and the hard tasks, and just get it done, because it's not going to get any better. And then one of my favorite ones that I've learned this year is just noticing your reactions to what's kind of setting a spark in you. I think a lot of us go into school thinking that we're going to have one specific area that we're going to work in, and then we go into a job and it's like, oh, this is actually what I'm interested in. And that's kind of what's happened to me, where I thought I was going to do therapy forever, and I've actually really, really fallen in love with policy and program development. So, just know yourself, follow yourself, and yeah, do what's good for you.
Thank you. All right, Jay, what about you? What's your advice for us?
So I will close it out with basically saying ditto to everyone else. But one thing I will always ask you to do, wherever you're at, don't ever be afraid to ask questions, because what you don't know is you don't know. Because what ends up happening is if you don't ask the questions, sometimes you set yourself up for not being successful. And as fellow social workers, we want you to always be successful with wherever you're at. I will echo the network of the people that you're in going through this professional development week. Take names, get people's phone numbers, always do that. Your fellow students. I was in a cohort of 16 people. I still have fairly regular contact with about 10 of them. And this was over 3 years ago. So part of that is always knowing that you're going to have somebody that you can ask a question to. Even if it's not at your job, it's maybe somebody else that you respect or admire. So that's all I'll say about that.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to look in the chat here. We have a question about how hard was it to find a job? And do you have any tips on a job search? Let's see. Katie, what about you? Do you have any job searching tips?
It was terrifying going into the workforce when I did, just because, like I said, it was the very beginning of the pandemic and no one knew how to do any of it. It was difficult at first to find a job, but what really helped me is not lowering your standards, but understanding that I wasn't going to get my dream position right off the bat. That happens to like 1% of people. So just knowing that you kind of start low, but then moving upward within the organization kind of gets you more names to know. So it wasn't too terrible. Just really practice your interviewing skills and know your people.
Melanie, I feel like you already kind of gave us some of that, but do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I didn't have a super hard time like I said, I was able to go back to a program that I had done practicum with. I will say, like, the impact you make as a student, don't take that for granted. When I was in a hiring role, my favorite hires were students that I knew were a good fit for us. And there were also students where I was like, I would never hire them based on how this year has gone, and that's just being honest. But if you are somewhere in a placement where you have interest, really, give it your all and use those networks. I think that's a really important piece. And I agree with what Katie said too. Sometimes you have to figure out, like, where can I start right now that seems at least somewhat interesting, even if it's not my dream job, because you may learn that it's something you like more than you thought. And it may be sort of a bridge towards something that you want to do in the future.
Thank you. All right, Misty, what do you have for us about job searching?
So I was obviously CWPEP, and so you don't have a guarantee position, but you kind of do because you already went through the interview process. So mine was really not hard, but of course, right now, like I have 7 graduating, and that's one of their biggest questions. What if I'm the first person who doesn't get hired? And so I would just say, like, the things I do with them is, spruce up your resume. So find somebody who can review your resume, make sure that it's just looking really good. Use your practicum as experience. I don't know how many people do their resume and they forget to utilize their practicum on there. So add your practicum. That's really valuable experience that you can share that you've been involved in. And then, when the students start, I always say, you're signing up for a year-long job application interview process. So impress all the time, because I agree, the majority of supervisors, they'll be inquiring about, students. So, and so if you're not getting hired on in your practicum, I agree with what Melanie and Katie said too. I definitely did not think DHS was where I wanted to land. I didn't even know anything about child welfare. It's really, really surprised me, and has, if I wanted to do something else outside of it, what a great stepping stone. I have worked with, mental health, substance abuse, domestic violence. You name it, we work with, clients, and we're finding resources. And so I think, even if you've heard something about an agency or a private, organization or something, if they have a position and you're feeling curious about it, it might lead to something, that you never expected. So.
Thank you.
I'll add one other thing I thought of. Cover letters matter. Do not take those for granted. Resumes can start to really look the same if you're someone who does a lot of hiring. Cover letters can really make the difference, though. That's where you get to show even just how you communicate, why that role might be interesting. So do not use do not do a standard cover letter that you use everywhere you apply. Make it tailored to what you're applying for.
That's a good one. All right, Jay.
So I will echo what Melanie said. Cover letters matter. That helps you make you stand out if they don't know who you are. I want to give you 2 links, 2 sites to go to. One is the Center for Nonprofits. So whoever's typing in the chat, if they put that in. And Indeed, believe it or not, is a place that you can find social work or case manager jobs. We are in a unique state where there's lots of opportunities to make this state better in terms of social work. So there are not going to be a lack of jobs. What you also have to do is, as someone also said, make sure that you're setting your expectations or managing your expectations, because again, your dream job is not going to be the first one that you get right out of school. Sometimes that first one will lead to others and moving up successfully. So Indeed and Center for Nonprofits, they're always posting job opportunities.
I'm sorry, what were those websites again?
Center for Nonprofits
Is that just Center for
Yeah.
Nonprofit?
You can Google Center for Nonprofit. There'll
Okay.
be a link. They'll have job openings,
Okay.
and it links all the nonprofits here in Oklahoma.
Oh, cool. All right. Let's see. How do you fight sympathy fatigue? Who wants to go first? I'm going to call on Jay. You're still unmuted, so I'm calling on you. How do you fight sympathy fatigue?
Sure. So I guess when we talk about sympathy fatigue, we also talk about compassion fatigue. So you hear vicarious trauma through the stories that your clients are telling you. Being understanding of who you are is very important, of how much you can take on and how much you and you'll learn this as you go, but you're making sure that the client is owning their story and their life. You're just kind of a partner along in this journey. So I think if I could just kind of answer it in that way, is not necessarily become numb to the story, but making sure that they're owning their story and owning their emotions. At the end of the day, you have to have enough energy for yourself and your friends around you. It's like the airplane analogy. If you don't put your mask on first, you're not going to be able to help anybody else. So making sure that you're putting your own protective factors in there as well.
All right. Katie, what about you? Do you have anything to add?
Can you repeat the question again one more time?
It was just, how do you fight sympathy or compassion fatigue?
It's hard. It's really hard, but I think something really important is just recognizing your own triggers. Dr. Natali, I remember in my junior year, said most of us in social work are all some sort of wounded healer. So just knowing like what those wounds are for you, and if, not seeing that as a weakness, but just knowing how to, the best way to cope with it and the best way to make yourself better, whether that's going to therapy or getting some physical activity, getting away from work, separating those things, that's really helpful. Yeah, I think that's probably the best answer I can give.
Thank you. And Melanie, what about you?
All of the above. Do your own therapy. And a lot of times there are therapists out there who work specifically with other mental health providers, and that can feel kind of especially validating. Get good supervision, use your time off, and like actually not just a day here and there, but it's also important sometimes like take an entire week off. That's a different experience than like a long weekend. And then there's a really, really excellent book called Trauma Stewardship. I recommend that to everybody. It's been around a while, but it's really good.
Thank you. Misty, how do you fight compassion fatigue?
So yeah, I agree. All of the above that everyone has said. When Melanie said supervision, I think also when you're job hunting, it is really important to know who your supervisor is going to be. Because for me, that was what was, especially that first year out of school, my supervisor was like my go-to. I could go in, shut the door, and that enabled me to leave everything behind. And then just our unit, so making friends at work, not necessarily friends that you're going to go hang out with on Friday night and talk about the work that you're doing. But during that time, separating that from home was a really good way. And I agree, just knowing yourself. I don't know if they still do it in the program, but in my MSW, we had to write a paper that was, and it asked very in-depth questions about yourself. And I was, older when I wrote the paper. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like reading the syllabus, I was like, I already know myself. Like, what is this? Like, I'm not going to have a difficult time with this at all. And as I answered the questions and really dove down some of those paths for myself, like it opened up a lot more in me that I'm like, wow, okay, like I get now why I respond this way in these certain situations. And so having that, where you're constantly just getting to know yourself better, I think that's brilliant.
Thank you. Okay, looks like it's 2:45, so I think we were supposed to end at 2:45, but we do have one more question. If you have to go, I understand, but we had one more question. Is there a topic that you wish you'd learned more about in school? Katie, what about you?
I don't know. Like I said, I didn't realize at the time I was more into policy analysis and program development. And that's just not something that they get very in-depth in your BSW. That's more so with masters. So I'm about to go into that and I'm excited to learn more about it. But I wish there had been something that was like, there is more macro focus than you think, not just direct practice.
Thank you. Jay, what about you?
I think it's a little challenging to kind of think about. I think what I know about doing therapy, probably a little more counseling skills, probably, and that I think that was a consistent that came out of our cohort about when we landed kind of in our job or continued more in our jobs, that we weren't getting as much counseling as we did. Again, schools change, things take different directions. So I think just in our cohort, I think that was kind of what was missing.
Thank you. Melanie, was there anything that you wish you'd learned about more in school?
I would say trauma in general. And yeah, there's so much more I wish I would have learned. I don't recall learning hardly anything about domestic violence. I've obviously kind of specialized in some of that, but I think given the prevalence, that's really a gap. And then sort of on the macro and policy side of things, grant writing would have been really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good one. I just want to make sure that our panelists are aware, if you want to use the link for that is in the chat. And Misty, I'll let you answer that question, and then I think we're finished.
So I think like topic wise, the thing that I think I've learned a lot more now after graduating, and maybe it just wasn't even a conversation as much back then, but learning more about hope. And so how that relates to like the work that we do specifically, that's been something that I've kind of uncovered on my own, my work with students. And so like the vulnerability and the shame piece, but then how hope, can be a piece in that. And so that's, if I was going to recommend a book to students that I recommend to my master's level, they read it through their practicum, is hope, The Science of Hope. It's an excellent book. I think it's I'm terrible with like author names and stuff like that, but Chan Helwig, and yes, that book, Hope Rising. Thank you. The Science of Hope. That is a brilliant book. And no matter what agency you're in, I'm sure that you can like draw the connections through the work that you guys do. And because for us, we can, like, it's just brilliant. It ties in perfectly with what we hope to accomplish when we're working with our, clients. And I just didn't hear anything about that while I was going through the program.
All right, great. Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you for attending. Thank you for being a panelist. This was great. I feel very reassured. You guys addressed a lot of concerns that I know I had.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.